Have you ever been treated like a failure by your own family? Have you ever been told that your dream was ridiculous, that you were throwing your life away? What if years later, those same people who humiliated you, laughed at you, and abandoned you when you needed them most, knocked on your door begging for your help? What would you do? Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a woman who faced this impossible choice. And her decision will make you question everything about forgiveness, family, and revenge. There's a wound few people have the courage to talk about. The one that opens when you realize your own family doesn't believe you. When the people who should support you are the very ones who hurt you the most. When you become invisible in your own home. Claire experienced this firsthand. She grew up in a home where love was conditional, where your worth depended on your achievements, the choices you made, and how well you fit into the plan already laid out for you. And when she dared to follow a different path, when she had the courage to say, "I want something else," everything changed. She never imagined that pursuing her dreams would cost so much, that choosing her own happiness would mean losing her family ties, that building the life she wanted would mean walking alone for years. But that's exactly what happened. Years of coldness, years of disappointed looks, years of being treated as if she had disappeared. While her brother was applauded for every small step, she was ignored for every major achievement. While her parents spoke of him proudly to anyone who would listen, they hid her existence as if it were a source of shame. But Claire kept going, even when the loneliness seemed endless, even when she cried so many nights she lost count, even when the voice in her head screamed at her to call and say, "You were right, I give up." She didn't stop. And then, when she finally built her empire on her own, when she proved she could, when she achieved the success no one bet she would, the phone rang. It was her mother, desperate, and the words on that call turned everything upside down. Before we dive into this story, tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I love knowing where you're from. Claire always knew she was different from the rest of her family, but she never imagined that being different would become such a big problem. She grew up in a simple home in a lower middle-class neighborhood, where every penny counted and every decision had to make financial sense. Her father, Robert, worked as a manager at a hardware store, and her mother, Barbara, ran the household with the same rigor with which she organized the bills at the end of the month. Since childhood, Claire had heard the same story repeated like a mantra. Her older brother, Mark, was the future of the family. He was smart, focused, and responsible. He would be a civil engineer. He would bring stability. He would make everyone proud, and he did. Mark graduated at 24, got a good job, and bought a car. He was the perfect son. Claire was the one who was still finding herself, the one who needed to grow up, the one who would one day understand responsibility. She was in her third year of business school, a school she hated. Each class seemed to suck a piece of her soul. Spreadsheets, numbers, financial projections. It all made sense in her head, but it didn't touch her heart. She spent her nights sketching clothes in old notebooks, imagining fabrics, colors, textures. She daydreamed of fashion shows, collections, stores with her name on the facade. But that was just a hobby. That's what everyone said. Claire and her drawings. Barbara would comment with a condescending smile when someone asked. She always liked these art things, but now she's studying something serious, Robert would add, as if he needed to justify his daughter. Until one night, Claire couldn't take it anymore. It was a Sunday family dinner. Mark was there, excitedly talking about a promotion at work. Barbara was beaming. Robert was patting his son on the shoulder with genuine pride in his eyes. And Claire was there, sitting at the head of the table, invisible. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaking more than she'd intended. Everyone turned to her in surprise. Claire rarely interrupted Mark's celebrations. "I'm dropping out of business school." The silence that fell over the table was heavy, suffocating. Barbara paused with her fork in midair. Robert frowned, that deep crease appearing between his eyebrows. Mark tilted his head curiously. "What do you mean you're going to lock it?" Robert asked, his voice already thick with irritation. Claire took a deep breath. It was now or never. I want to study fashion design. I want to work in it. It's what I've always wanted to do, and I can't stand pretending that business is what I want for my life anymore. What happened next was worse than she'd imagined in her worst nightmares. Robert stood up from his chair abruptly, making the table shake. "Are you kidding me, Claire? Are you kidding?" "Dad, do you know how much I pay for this college? Do you know the sacrifice I make every month to ensure you have a future? And you want to throw it all in the trash to do what?" "So," Barbara began to cry. It wasn't a delicate cry, it was a desperate, dramatic cry. "Where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong to make you so selfish? Mom, it's not about you. It's about me. It's about this family." Barbara raised her voice, something rare for her. "We did everything for you two. Everything. We gave up things. We saved on everything, and you want to throw that away for a whim?" Mark, who had been quiet until then, let out a dry laugh. "Fashion design. Seriously, Claire? What do you think you'll achieve with that? Become a stylist to the stars?" He laughed again, shaking his head. "You're so naive, still so young. I'm 22, Mark. I know what I want. You don't know anything." Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "You're an irresponsible child with no grasp of reality. You think the world runs on dreams, on pretty drawings. Wake up, Claire, real life is hard, and you need a real job, stability. But I don't want the life you planned for me." The words were out before Claire could stop them, and the moment they were out, she knew there was no going back. Robert's face turned red. He pointed a finger at her, his hand shaking with anger. "So you know what you're going to do. You're going to follow your ridiculous little dream alone. Don't expect a dime from me. Don't expect support. You want to be an adult? Then be one. But don't come crying here when reality hits you in the face." Barbara covered her face with her hands, crying harder. Mark looked at Claire with a mixture of pity and contempt, and Claire, sitting at that table, felt for the first time the bitter taste of family rejection. She got up, grabbed her bag, and left that house feeling like she would never be the same again. That night, Claire didn't know it, but she had just made a decision that would change her life forever. The question that lingered was simple and frightening. Was she making the biggest mistake of her life, or the bravest thing she had ever done? What about you? Have you ever had to choose between pleasing your family or following your heart? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you're enjoying Claire's journey, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any more moving stories like this. Claire didn't back down. Even though her heart was broken, even though her father's voice echoed in her head, calling her dream ridiculous, she went to the college the following Monday and withheld her business administration degree. Her hands were shaking as she signed the papers, but she did. Then she walked to the design school across town and enrolled using all the money she'd saved working the previous summers. It was $2,400. Every penny she'd saved over 3 years of waiting tables, selling jewelry, and doing odd jobs. It was all she had, and now it was invested in a dream everyone said was impossible. But she still lived at her parents' house. And that's when all hell broke loose. Living together became unbearable. Robert stopped talking to her completely. When Claire entered the living room, he would get up and go to his bedroom. When she tried to say good morning, he would look right through her as if she were invisible, as if she didn't exist. Barbara was different. She spoke, but every word was a stab. "Your food is on the table, since you can't support yourself with your drawings yet," she'd say with a cold smile. Or, when a neighbor asked about her children, "Oh, Mark is doing very well at work. He's thinking about buying a house. And Claire? Well, Claire is taking a little crafts course. Craftsmanship. It wasn't design. It was craftsmanship, like something old ladies did to pass the time. Mark was even worse. He no longer lived at home, but he came over for dinner every Sunday, and every time it was the same. He sat at the head of the table, the place of honor, and looked at Claire with that superior expression that made her stomach churn. "So, Claire, have you sewn anything today?" he asked one of those Sundays, laughing at his own joke. Barbara gave a small chuckle. Robert continued eating in silence, but Claire saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile. "I'm learning how to model," Claire replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Modeling," Mark repeated, shaking his head. "Wow, that's fancy. And how much will you make from that? About $50 a month." "Mark, don't be rude," Barbara said, but without any conviction in her voice. It was just lip service. "I'm just being realistic, Mom." Someone has to be, since she's clearly not seeing reality. Claire gripped her fork so tightly her knuckles turned white. But she didn't answer. There was no point. Anything she said would be used against her. Any defense would be seen as immaturity, as stubbornness, as proof that she truly didn't know what she was doing. Weeks turned into months. Claire would wake up early, take 2 buses to school, spend the entire day studying color theory, fashion history, and sewing techniques, and return home exhausted. Then she worked as a cashier at a supermarket from 6 in the evening until midnight to make ends meet. She barely saw her family, and when she did, it was worse than being alone. "Aren't you going to have dinner with us tonight?" Barbara asked one night, as Claire walked straight past the kitchen to her bedroom. "I ate something at work, Mom." "Work," Barbara repeated, in that tone. That tone that made it clear she didn't consider supermarket cashiering a real job. "You know, if you'd stayed in business school, you'd already be interning at some big company, right? Earning well, building a real resume." Claire stopped in the bedroom doorway, her back still to her mother. "I know, Mom. But you preferred it that way, so don't complain when things get tough." "I'm not complaining." "Not yet, but it will." Claire walked into the room and closed the door. She leaned against it and let her tears fall silently. Because if she cried loudly, they would hear, and hearing her cry would be the confirmation they wanted. Proof that she was wrong, that she couldn't handle it, that she would soon give up. But she wouldn't give up. She couldn't. One day, Barbara had a visitor at home. It was her childhood friend, Mrs. Patricia, who had always been a gossip. Claire was studying in her room when she heard voices in the living room. "What about Claire? I heard she dropped out of college," Patricia asked, her voice thick with false concern. "Oh, Patricia, don't even tell me." Barbara sighed dramatically. She decided to drop everything to take this sewing course. "I don't know what came over her. I think it's a phase, you know. She's still lost, trying to find herself." "Wow, Barbara, what a difficult situation for you." "Yes, we did everything for our children, Patricia. Everything. Mark, thank God, turned out well. But Claire," her voice trailed off, as if it were too painful to continue. Claire closed her notebook. She couldn't concentrate anymore. She grabbed her bag, put on her sneakers, and left through the back door. She didn't want to go through the living room. She didn't want to see Mrs. Patricia's pitying face. She didn't want to hear anything else. That night, sitting on an empty park bench, Claire made a decision. She couldn't live in that house anymore. No matter how hard it would be, no matter that she would have to work even harder, no matter that she would suffer even more, she had to get out of there. Because staying in that environment was slowly killing her, extinguishing every spark of courage she had left. And if she truly wanted to build the life she dreamed of, she needed to do it away from those who only knew how to destroy her dreams. But how do you leave when you barely have enough money to eat? How do you start over when you're completely alone? 3 months after that decision on the park bench, Claire finally managed to save the money she needed. It wasn't much. $300 for the first month's rent and another $300 for a deposit. But it was enough to get out of that house that was no longer a home, but a silent battlefield where she lost every day. The room she rented was on the other side of town, in a simple, noisy neighborhood. It was tiny. It literally held only a single bed, an old dresser with 2 drawers, and nothing else. There was no large window, just a crack that let in a little light. But it was hers. No one would look at her with disappointment there. No one would make nasty comments. It was freedom, even if it came at a high price. Claire didn't tell anyone she was leaving. She simply packed her things into 2 old suitcases on a Saturday morning when she knew Robert was working and Barbara had gone to the grocery store. She left a simple note on the kitchen table. "Thanks for everything. I'll be fine, Claire." When Barbara called that night, her voice was irritated. "What do you think you're doing?" "I need to live my life, Mom." "Living your life? Running away? That's not living, Claire. That's irresponsible. Mom, it will be better this way. For everyone." There was a pause. Then Barbara sighed wearily. "It's okay. You always do what you want anyway." And he hung up, without asking for the address, without asking if she was safe, without saying he'd miss her. Just that cold hang-up that confirmed everything Claire already knew. She really was alone. The routine that developed was brutal. Claire would wake up at 5:30 in the morning, take 2 crowded buses to the design school, and attend classes until noon. Then she'd rush to the supermarket where she worked as a cashier from 2 in the afternoon until 10 at night. 6 days a week. Sunday was her only day off, but she used it to study, do schoolwork, and try not to think about how exhausted she was. Money was always tight. After paying for rent, transportation, food, and school supplies, there was almost nothing left. Claire learned to live on instant noodles, bread and butter, and whatever was on sale at the supermarket where she worked. She lost weight. The dark circles under her eyes became permanent, but she kept going. He still tried to keep in touch with his family. He called Barbara every Sunday morning before he started school. The conversations were always the same. Short, cold, empty. "Hi, Mom, how are you?" "Good, and you?" "Tired, but fine. Working hard." That's good." Awkward silence. "Is Dad okay?" "It is. Working as always." "Blow him a kiss." "Yes, I do." More silence. "Well, Mom, I just wanted to say hi. See how things are going over there." "It's all the same, Claire. Take care." And then she hung up. Every week, the same script, as if they were 2 strangers following social protocol. No affection. No real interest. Just that cold, empty ritual that hurt more than Claire admitted to herself. Sometimes Barbara would call to invite her to a family dinner. Birthdays, holidays, those occasions where her absence would be noticed and commented on by relatives. Claire always went, even though she knew what to expect. And it was always the same thing. She'd arrive. She'd greet everyone. And I immediately knew where they'd put her, at the head of the table, away from the center of attention, away from where the conversations were happening. Mark always sat next to his parents, in the place of honor. Claire sat there on the edge, like a last-minute guest. Throughout dinner, Mark was asked questions. How was work going? What about that new project? Did he get that promotion? Did he buy the new car? Every detail of his life was celebrated, discussed, and praised. Robert beamed with genuine pride. Barbara hung on her son's every word, and Claire, at most, she received an automatic, "And you, Claire, how are things?" with no real interest in the answer. She started to just reply, "Fine," because anything beyond that was ignored anyway. The worst were the moments when someone from outside would arrive. Uncles, cousins, family friends. Barbara would introduce Mark enthusiastically. "This is my son Mark, a civil engineer, doing really well in his career." And then she would look at Claire and say, without emotion, "And this is Claire. She's still finding her feet, taking some courses somewhere. Some courses somewhere, as if design were a weekend hobby, as if she weren't working hard every day, killing herself working and studying simultaneously, as if she were just an embarrassing phase the family had to tolerate." Once, at one of these dinners, an aunt asked Claire directly, "And you, dear, when are you going back to college for real? Your mother told me that you dropped out of business administration." Before Claire could respond, Barbara interrupted. "Oh, I always tell her, right, Claire? There's still time to get back to something serious. You're still young. You can start over." "Mom, I don't want to go back. I'm happy with what I'm doing." "Happy?" Barbara laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was a laugh of disbelief. "Claire, you work in a supermarket and live in a tiny room. That's not happiness, daughter. That's stubbornness." Mark, sitting across the table, nodded in agreement. "One day you'll understand, little sister. One day you'll wake up and realize we were right all along." Claire didn't answer. He simply lowered his head and continued eating. Because arguing was pointless. Every word of defense was seen as immaturity. Every argument was ignored. She was invisible, worse than invisible. She was the disappointment no one wanted to look at, but also couldn't completely shut out to avoid looking bad to others. That night, returning to her cramped little room on the empty early morning bus, Claire cried silently, because that indifference hurt. It hurt more than any scream. It hurt more than any fight. At least in a fight there's emotion, there's some kind of connection. But that coldness, that treatment of her as if she were an inconvenient ghost that appeared every now and then, it cut deep in a place she didn't know how to heal. But she wouldn't give up. She couldn't. Because if she gave up now, they'd be right. And Claire refused to give them that victory. Even if it meant continuing to be alone. Even if it meant continuing to be treated like nothing. She was going to prove it. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to prove herself right. The question that kept her awake at night was simple and terrifying. How much longer could she hold on? 6 months later, Claire held her fashion design degree certificate in her hands and felt a strange mix of pride and fear. She'd done it. She'd topped her class. But now came the hardest part, finding work in the field. She put together a simple portfolio of her best schoolwork, printed her resumes on cheap paper, and began the battle. She sent them to clothing manufacturers, ateliers, boutiques, independent designers, anywhere that would give her a chance. The responses were devastating. Most didn't even respond. Some sent automated emails. "Thank you for your interest, but we currently have no openings." 3 called for an interview. They looked at her portfolio with that polite but disinterested expression, asked basic questions, and said the phrase Claire grew to hate, "We'll be in touch." They never entered. A month passed. 2, 3. Rent money was running low. Claire had to quit the supermarket because her schedule didn't allow her to look for work during the day. It was a risky gamble. She had 2 months' worth of savings, maybe 3 if she ate sparingly. After that, I didn't know what I would do. She began taking any job that came her way. She cleaned houses. She delivered food by bike in the rain. She worked at events serving drinks. She assembled furniture for people who bought online. Whatever paid, she did. She devoted her evenings to what she truly wanted to do. She bought cheap fabrics from thrift stores, used the old sewing machine the school was discarding, and sold for $50, and began creating. Simple pieces at first, blouses, skirts, basic dresses. She took photos with her old cell phone, edited them as best she could, and posted them on social media. Exclusive, handmade pieces, original design, she wrote in the captions, trying to sound professional. The first few weeks, nothing. No sales, no likes, no interest. Claire looked at the photos and wondered if she was doing something completely wrong. Maybe the clothes were ugly. Maybe no one wanted them. Maybe her family had been right all along. Then came the first sale. A woman bought a blouse for $35. Claire screamed to herself in her little room when she saw the notice. She carefully wrapped the item, handwritten a thank you note, and mailed it, feeling like she'd conquered the world. But one sale didn't pay the bills. In the following weeks, she sold 2 more pieces, $60 in total. Rent was $300. Electricity and water bills, another $80. Food, if she ate as little as possible, about $150. She was running out of money fast. There were days when Claire was truly hungry, not the "I feel like eating" kind of hunger, but the kind that hurts your stomach, makes your head spin, makes you think about food constantly. She learned that apples were cheap and filling, that stale bread could be toasted and still be edible. That hot salted water gave the illusion of soup. At night, alone in that cold little room, Claire cried. She cried from hunger, exhaustion, loneliness, fear. She picked up the phone 1,000 times, thinking about calling home. But she always remembered those cold conversations, those disappointed looks, those dinners where she was invisible. And she put the phone back, until the day she couldn't avoid arrived. It was the 28th of the month. Rent was due on the 1st. Claire had $140 in her account. She had sold only 3 items that month. She had no more cleaning jobs scheduled. She had nothing left. She was going to be evicted. She was going to be left on the streets. 24 years old, with no family, no money, nothing. With shaking hands, she dialed her mother's number. It rang 3 times, 4. Claire almost hung up. Then Barbara answered, "Hello? Hi, Mom. It's Claire." "Hi, Claire. How are you?" The voice was casual, disinterested. Claire took a deep breath. "Mom, I need help." Silence on the other side. "What kind of help?" Barbara's voice grew colder. "I don't have enough money to pay rent this month. I've looked for work. I swear I have. But I haven't found anything in the design field yet, and the jobs I'm getting aren't enough. I just need a loan, just until I get back on my feet. I'll pay you back, Mom. I promise." Another silence. Longer, heavier. "Claire, do you remember what your father said when you decided to follow this path?" Her stomach sank. "Mom, he said you were going to do this alone, that you wouldn't have our support, and you agreed. You left home. You chose this." "I know, Mom, but I'm just asking for a loan. It's not a gift. I'll give it back." "Claire." Barbara's voice was hard now, no warmth at all. "You chose this path. Now face the consequences. You're an adult. You wanted to prove you can do it on your own, so prove it." The tears began to fall before Claire could hold them back. "Mom, please. I have no one else." "You did. You had a family. But you chose your stupid dreams over us, so now you live with your choice. I'm not going to feed that irresponsibility by giving you money. You need to get real, Claire. You need to stop this fantasy and come back to reality." "Mother, I have to go. Good luck with your stuff." And he hung up. Claire stood there, clutching the phone, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't just a rejection, it was a door closing. It was the final confirmation that she truly was completely alone in this world. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling hunger tighten in her stomach, feeling fear tighten in her chest. Part of her wanted to give up. Call Barbara again, beg her, tell her she was right, crawl back. But another part, a small but stubborn part, refused. That part whispered, "If you go back now, you'll prove them right. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering, what if? You'll die without ever having truly tried." Claire wiped away her tears. She got out of bed and decided she would find a way. She didn't know how yet, but she would, because that conversation hadn't destroyed her. I had done something different. He had ignited a rage, a determination she hadn't known she had. If they wanted her to fail, she would prove them wrong, even if it killed her. But where do you start when you have literally nothing left? 4 years had passed since that call to Barbara. 4 years of hard work, sleepless nights, constant doubts, and nearly giving up 1,000 times. Claire was now 26. And finally, for the first time since she started, she was seeing real results. Online sales had grown slowly, very slowly at first. But Claire learned. She improved her product photos. She studied social media, how to write captions that connected with people, how to showcase her work in a way that caught people's attention. She started posting videos showing the creation process. People loved seeing that. They liked knowing a real person was making each garment by hand. A video went viral. It was a simple blouse, but the video showed Claire cutting the fabric, sewing every detail, explaining her choices. It had 300,000 views. Orders exploded. Suddenly, she had a waiting list, people wanting to buy, people willing to wait weeks to receive a piece she made. Claire could hardly believe it. She spent entire nights sewing to keep up with the orders. Her fingers sometimes bled from using the needle so much. Her back ached from hunching over the sewing machine. But she was happy. She was building something real. With the money starting to come in more consistently, she made an important decision. She rented a small office in an old commercial building. It wasn't pretty. The walls were leaking, the floor was cracked, and the window didn't close properly. But it had space. It had a large table where she could cut fabric. It had shelves where she could organize materials. It even had its own bathroom. It was hers, her first real professional space. Claire spent an entire weekend cleaning, painting the walls white with cheap paint, and organizing everything. When she was finished, she took photos. The small room was simple, but clean, organized, filled with rolls of colorful fabric and brimming with possibilities. She looked at the photos on her phone and thought about her family. It had been over a year since she'd spoken to anyone. The weekly calls to Barbara had stopped after that refusal to help. Claire had tried a few more times since, but the conversations were so cold, so empty, that she eventually gave up trying. But now, looking at that space she'd carved out for herself, Claire felt the urge to share. Maybe now they'd see. Maybe now they'd understand she wasn't joking, that it was real, that she was doing it. He grabbed his phone and sent the photos to the family group, a WhatsApp group that had been silent for months, but still existed. He wrote a simple message. I managed to rent my first space to work. Small, but it's a start. She stared at the screen, waiting for answers. The 3 dots appeared. Someone was typing. Her heart raced. Then came Barbara's reply. 1 word. Okay. Claire waited longer. No Robert, no Mark. Just that cold, okay, from her mother. Half an hour later, Mark finally responded. But it wasn't what she expected. Cool, Claire. Let me know when you have a real job, then we can talk. The words hit like a punch. Claire read them again and again. Real work. After 4 years of busting his ass, of building something from scratch, of finally having his own space, this was his answer. She started typing a reply. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted. What could she say? How could she explain it to someone who didn't want to understand? Robert never responded. Not even Barbara's cold, okay. Just silence. Claire pocketed her phone and looked around the small room. The white walls, the colorful fabrics. The sewing machine she bought, used but which worked perfectly. The mannequin she found at a thrift store. All of it was hers, earned with her own sweat, her own hands, her own determination. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. She realized she'd been seeking approval from people who would never give it, that she'd been waiting for them to finally say, "We're proud of you." But they never would. Because accepting that she was right meant admitting they were wrong, and they never would. Claire grabbed her phone back and left the family group. Not angry, not hurt, but clear. She didn't need this anymore. She didn't need to try to prove anything to them anymore. What she was building wasn't for their approval. It was for herself. It was because she believed in it. It was because it made sense for her life. She would keep going. She would grow. She would build something even greater. Not to rub it in their faces, but because it was what she wanted for her life. And if they never saw the value in it, that was their problem, not hers. In the following months, Claire worked even harder. Sales continued to grow. She began attending craft and design fairs on the weekends. She met other entrepreneurs, other people who were also building their dreams from scratch. She made real friends with people who understood the struggle, who celebrated every small victory. Her bank account, for the first time in years, had money left over at the end of the month. Not much, but there was enough. She was able to buy a new, professional sewing machine. She was able to buy better fabrics. She was able to invest in attractive packaging for her products. She was far from rich. She still lived in that cramped little room. She still ate plain food. She still had to economize on everything. But she was growing. She was moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, Claire slept at night without that weight on her chest, without that need for approval that had haunted her for so long. She was 26 years old and was finally learning the most important thing, that the only approval that really mattered was her own. 2 years passed. Claire was now 28, and her brand was growing in ways she never imagined. What began as pieces sold on social media had turned into something bigger, much bigger. She participated in entrepreneurial fairs every month. At first, it was just small booths at local events. But little by little, the organizers began to notice her work. They began inviting her to larger fairs, more important events. Her pieces stood out. Her style had something unique that people recognized and desired. Stores began to appear. First, a small boutique downtown asked if she sold wholesale. Claire didn't even know how wholesale worked, but she learned quickly. She did the math, adjusted the prices, and signed her first contract. 3 months later, there were 5 stores. 6 months later, 12. The small room was no longer enough. Claire had to rent a larger space. It wasn't a pretty place yet, but it was twice the size. And for the first time, she hired help. 2 seamstresses, experienced women who knew techniques Claire was still learning. It was daunting at first, having employees, having to pay salaries, having responsibility for other people. But it was necessary. She could no longer handle it all alone. The money was finally coming in steadily. Claire was able to move out of that tiny room. She rented a small, 1-bedroom apartment, but it was hers alone. It had a full kitchen. It had a living room. It had a sofa where she could sit and watch TV after a day's work. It felt like luxury after years of sharing cramped spaces and eating instant noodles. She was succeeding, really succeeding. She wasn't rich, but she was stable. She had money to pay the bills, to eat well, to invest in the business. For the first time since this journey began, Claire could breathe without the constant anxiety of, what if the money runs out? The family remained distant. Claire no longer had any contact with them. She had left the WhatsApp group 2 years ago and never returned. She didn't call, text, or visit, and they didn't reach out to her either. It was as if she no longer existed for them, and they no longer existed for her. But the town was small enough for news to get around. And it did. One afternoon, Claire was setting up her stall at a trade show when she heard 2 women talking nearby. She didn't pay attention at first, busy organizing her items. But then she heard a familiar name. "Have you seen Barbara's daughter's clothes, the one who dropped out of college a few years ago?" Claire froze. "Yes, I did. It was on my friend's Instagram. The pieces are beautiful, and she's selling them in several stores now." Who would have thought, right? Yeah, Barbara must be proud. The other woman gave a short laugh. Proud? I doubt it. You know Barbara, she only talks about her engineer son. She doesn't even mention her daughter. Really? But the girl is doing so well. Yeah, but you know how it is. Some families are like that. They have a favorite child, and that's it. The women walked away, but that conversation echoed in Claire's head all day. Her family knew. Of course they knew. In a town that size, it was impossible not to know. Acquaintances saw her pieces, commented, shared them. People talked, but Barbara, Robert, and Mark had never said a word to her. They never texted. They never acknowledged her growth. A few weeks later, Claire was invited to a family lunch. Not by her parents, but by a cousin, Jennifer, who was celebrating her birthday. Jennifer had always been nice to Claire, one of the few who didn't judge her when she dropped out of college. Her cousin texted, "I know you're busy, but I'd love to see you here. There will be a lot of family." Claire hesitated. She hadn't seen her family in almost 3 years, but Jennifer had been kind to her. She decided to go. Lunch was at her cousin's house. When Claire arrived, there were at least 20 people there. Uncles, aunts, cousins. And in the center of the room, as always, were Robert, Barbara, and Mark. The reaction when she walked in was strange. Some people came up to greet her enthusiastically. "Claire, I heard about your work. How amazing!" Others just waved from afar, unsure of what to do. Barbara saw her and waved politely, coldly, as if Claire were a distant acquaintance. Robert didn't even notice. He just looked, acknowledged her, and continued talking to whoever was next to him. Mark was sitting on the couch with his girlfriend and didn't even get up. Throughout lunch, it was exactly as it always was. Everyone asked Mark questions. How was work going? What about that new project? Was he buying a house soon? Every detail of his life was interesting, celebrated, and discussed. Claire was there, sitting at the same table, but it was as if she were invisible. A cousin politely asked, "And you, Claire, how are things going?" But before she could respond with more than "fine," the conversation had already changed subject. The worst part was when an uncle, who clearly didn't know about the situation, asked out loud, "Barbara, I heard your daughter has a clothing business that's booming. You must be so proud." Barbara smiled, that polite, empty smile. "Oh, yes. Claire's doing her thing over there." She immediately changed the subject. "Anyone want more salad?" Her stuff out there. As if it were a hobby. As if it weren't a real, growing business that fully supported Claire and employed others. Claire finished eating in silence. She stayed another hour out of politeness with Jennifer, and then left. On the way home, she didn't cry. She didn't feel angry. She felt something different. She felt indifference. They hadn't changed. They never would. And finally, for the first time, it didn't really matter to her anymore. She had built a life without them. She had real friends. She had a growing business. She had purpose. She had fulfillment. They could continue to ignore her. They could continue to treat her as if she didn't exist. It didn't matter anymore. Claire had learned to live without their approval, and she was okay with that. Claire turned 30 on a rainy Thursday in March. She woke up early that day and looked in the mirror. 30 years. A full decade since she made the decision that changed everything. And now, finally, she was about to accomplish something that seemed impossible just a few years ago. She was going to open her first physical store. It wasn't big. It was only 40 square meters in a downtown shopping district. But it had a glass display case out front, her name written in beautiful letters above the door, fitting rooms, and racks full of pieces she'd created. It was small, but it was perfect. It was hers. Claire had worked tirelessly for the past 6 months to make this happen. He scraped together every penny. He negotiated with the landlord. He renovated the space with the help of friends. He painted the walls himself. He chose every detail of the decor. He set up the clothes racks. He arranged the pieces by color and style. He installed lighting that made the clothes shine just right. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday. Claire created invitations printed on beautiful paper. She sent them to loyal customers, friends, and people who supported her during those difficult years. She also sent them to her family. He took 3 envelopes. He handwrote the addresses, one for his parents, one for Mark. Inside each, he placed the invitation and a short letter he'd written and rewritten several times. "I would love for you to be there on this very important day for me. I know you didn't agree with my choices, but I've built something I'm proud of. It would be special to have you there, Claire." She mailed it and waited. Days passed, no response, not a message, not a call, nothing. But Claire tried not to think about it. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they'd respond at the last minute. Maybe they'd show up unannounced. The Saturday of the opening dawned sunny. Claire arrived at the store at 7 in the morning, even though the opening wasn't until noon. She needed to double-check everything. Were all the items well arranged? Were the decor perfect? Was there enough water and coffee for guests? Was there background music playing? Did she have the small gifts she'd prepared? Everything was ready. Claire took a deep breath, looking around. This was real. This was happening. Friends started arriving early to help. Laura, whom she met at an entrepreneur's fair and became a close friend. David, who worked at the printing shop where she printed her cards and always gave her a discount for helping out. The 2 seamstresses who worked with her and were just as excited as she was. Noon arrived. The doors opened. Customers began to enter. People who had bought from her online and had never seen the pieces in person. Curious passers-by who came in to browse. People Laura and David had invited. The store quickly filled with people, conversation, and positive energy. Claire was radiant. She chatted with everyone, explained the pieces, and thanked them for every compliment and every word of support. He sold several pieces in that first hour. He took pictures with customers. He smiled so much his face hurt. But with each person who entered, she looked, waiting, searching for those familiar faces. Barbara with her always neatly styled hair. Robert in that dress shirt he wore on special occasions. Mark, tall and confident. 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. The store was still full, busy, successful. But they never arrived. At 4 o'clock, Claire realized they weren't coming. They just weren't coming. They hadn't even texted. Not even a "sorry, we can't make it." Not even a "congratulations." Nothing. Absolute silence. She smiled at another customer, answered another fabric question, and closed another sale. And then, when she had a free minute, she went to the small bathroom in the back of the store, locked the door, and collapsed. She cried out everything she'd held in during those hours. She cried for the family that never believed in her. She cried for the years of rejection, coldness, and indifference. She cried because that should have been one of the happiest days of her life, and a part of her was broken because the people who should have been most proud of her simply weren't there. She had done it. I had built everything from scratch. I had proven it was possible, and they didn't even bother to show up. Not for half an hour, not for 15 minutes. They just completely ignored that moment. Claire washed her face, wiped away her tears, and looked in the mirror. Her eyes were red, but she managed to hide it. She took 3 deep breaths, and then something shifted inside her. She realized that moment was important, not because of who wasn't there, but because of who was. Laura, who dropped her Saturday plans to help. Davy, who brought his wife and children to watch. The seamstresses, who were proud to be a part of it. The customers who believed in her work. The strangers who walked in, liked it, and bought. She had built it all alone, without their help, without their support, without their money, without their presence, and it had worked. The store was there, real, concrete, full of people. She had done it. And in that small bathroom, her eyes still moist, Claire made a final decision. They had lost the right to be part of her achievements. They had lost the right to show up now and say they were proud. They had lost the right to be part of this story, because she didn't need them anymore. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their presence. She had everything she needed: herself, her talent, people who truly cared, and that beautiful store with her name on the door. Claire left the bathroom, returned to the crowded store, and continued smiling. A real smile now, because she finally understood that she had won. Not despite them, but without them. What about you? Have you ever had to move forward without the approval of those you expected? What was that moment like for you? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story and share this experience with you. 2 years had passed since the store opened. Claire was now 32, and her brand had grown beyond all expectations. The store was always busy. She had just signed contracts with 3 stores in other states. She had a small team working with her. She wasn't rich, but she was comfortable. She had a nice apartment. She had her own car. She had achieved everything on her own. Family remained a closed topic. Claire hadn't spoken to any of them since the day of the inauguration, when they hadn't shown up. She blocked their numbers, deleted their contacts. She moved on. Life was good. She was at peace. Until that Tuesday in October. Claire was in the store organizing the new inventory that had arrived when her cell phone rang. An unknown number. She usually didn't answer, but something made her do it this time. "Hello? Claire?" The voice was Barbara's, but not the usual cold, distant Barbara. It was a broken, desperate, crying Barbara. "Claire, please don't hang up." Claire's heart raced. "Mom, what happened?" "It's your father. He had a stroke, a serious stroke. He's in the hospital." Her voice was broken between sobs. The doctor said he needs surgery, intensive care, and months of physical therapy. And insurance, Claire. Insurance doesn't cover everything. It's going to cost over $80,000. I don't have that kind of money. I have nothing. Claire froze. Robert, the father who hadn't spoken to her in years, the father who treated her as if she didn't exist, the father who never, not once, said he was proud of her. He'd had a stroke. Mom, Wait, there's more, Barbara cried louder. Claire, Mark got involved in something very serious. He participated in a scheme to overcharge for city projects. When they found out, they opened an investigation. He lost everything, Claire. His professional license was revoked. He can no longer work as an engineer. He sold his house to pay his lawyers. He sold his car. He spent all his savings. He's living here with us again, completely devastated, unemployed, with nothing. Claire couldn't process what she was hearing. Mark, the perfect son, the pride of the family, the successful engineer she'd never been able to be. She'd lost everything. And I know, Claire, I know we were horrible to you. Barbara was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. But I know we treated you badly, that we didn't believe in you, that we abandoned you when you needed us. I know all of that. But I don't have anyone else. Mark is broke. Your father might die if he doesn't have the surgery. And I heard you're doing well now, that your business is booming, that you have money. The silence was heavy. You're calling me asking for money, Claire said, her voice coming out colder than she expected. I'm begging you, Claire. I'm on my knees here. Your father can die. Please. I know I don't deserve it. I know we don't deserve anything from you. But please. He's your father. He can die. Claire sat in a chair in the store. Her legs were no longer holding her up. 10 years. 10 years since she'd made that decision at the dinner table. 10 years of struggle, rejection, coldness, indifference. 10 years of building everything on her own while they treated her like she was nothing. And now they were asking for help. No, they were begging. Where were you when I needed you? Claire asked, her voice shaking. Where were you when I was starving, when I was about to be evicted and called for help? Do you remember what you told me, Mom? You said, face the consequences. You said I had chosen this path and that it was my problem. I know, Claire, I know. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. Where were you when I opened my store? I sent an invitation. I wrote a letter, and none of you showed up. Didn't even send a message. Nothing. We were wrong, Claire. Completely wrong. I have no excuse. I really don't. But please, don't let your father die because of our mistakes. Please. Claire closed her eyes. Tears began to fall uncontrollably. Part of her wanted to scream, wanted to say no, wanted to hang up the phone and block that number too. She wanted to make them feel the same rejection she'd felt for so many years. But another part of her, a part she didn't want to admit existed, still loved those people. She still remembered being a child and Robert hoisting her onto his shoulders to watch the fireworks. She still remembered Barbara teaching her how to bake cookies in the kitchen. She still remembered when Mark defended her from a boy who had bullied her at school. They were horrible people to her. They had been cruel, cold, rejecting, but they were still her family, and Robert was dying. How long do I have to decide? Claire asked, her voice barely coming out. The surgery needs to be done this week. The sooner the better. The doctors said the risk increases with each passing day. I'll think about it. I'll call you tomorrow. Claire, thank you. Thank you for even thinking. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I didn't show it. Please believe that. Claire hung up the phone. She sat there in the empty store, crying, shaking, feeling the weight of an impossible decision on her shoulders. She had the money. She had savings. She had managed to save nearly $100,000 over the past few years. She could pay for her father's treatment. But should she? After everything? After years of rejection? After building everything on her own while they laughed at her? Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. With each passing hour, she changed her mind. Yes, no, yes, no. The scales inside her teetered on end. She remembered every humiliation, Every time Barbara introduced her as the one who's still lost. Every dinner where she sat at the head of the table and was ignored. Every achievement of hers that was treated as if it were nothing. The hookup when she was about to be evicted and her mother said, "Face the consequences." The housewarming invitation that was completely ignored. Part of her screamed, "Let them fend for themselves like you had to." But then she remembered Robert before all this. The father who took her out for ice cream every Saturday when she was little. Who read her bedtime stories. Who worked hard every day to give his children the best he could. He had been cruel to her. But he had also been her father. And if she let him die out of revenge, what kind of person would she be? Would she be different from them? Or would she be exactly the same? He spent the entire week in agony. He couldn't concentrate on work. I couldn't eat properly. Every day he relived every painful moment, every cruel word Mark said, every disappointed look Robert gave, every mean comment Barbara made. She talked to Laura, her closest friend. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to help. Part of me wants them to feel what I felt." Laura took her hand. "Claire, you're not like them. You never were. And you're not going to start now. You know the right answer. You're just afraid to admit it." She was right. Deep down, Claire knew. On Friday morning, a week after that call, Claire called Barbara. "Mom, I'm going to pay for Dad's treatment." Barbara started crying immediately. "Claire, thank you, thank you, thank you. Wait, I'm not done." Claire took a deep breath. "I'll pay because I refuse to be the kind of person you were with me. I refuse to let someone die out of pride or hurt. But that doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean I've forgotten, and it doesn't mean things will go back to the way they were. I understand, Claire, I understand. And there's more. Mark needs a job, right? He needs to. He's desperate. No one wants to hire him after what happened. I have an opening at the store, general assistant. He will organize inventory, clean, make deliveries, help with whatever is needed. The salary is $1,200 a month. If he wants it, the position is his." There was a pause. Claire knew what Barbara was thinking. Mark, the engineer, working as a shop assistant. To the sister, he called a failure. "I'll talk to him," Barbara said, her voice low. "Great. I'm going to the hospital today to sort out the financial side of Dad's surgery." When Claire arrived at the hospital that afternoon, her stomach churned. She hadn't seen them in years. She found Barbara in the waiting room. She was much older. Gray hair, a tired face, and dark circles under her eyes. When she saw Claire, she stood up and stood there, unsure of what to do. Claire didn't know either. They stood there, 6 feet apart, two strangers who had once been mother and daughter. "Thank you for coming," Barbara said finally, her voice breaking. "Where do I resolve the payment part?" "Come with me." They went to the hospital's financial department. Claire filled out paperwork, swiped her card, signed authorizations, $83,000, years of hard work, years of saving, all there in one transaction to save the man who rejected her. "The surgery will be tomorrow morning," the hospital staff member informed him. "You're stable now." "Can he have visitors?" Claire asked. "Yes, you can, just 15 minutes at a time." Barbara led Claire to the bedroom. Before entering, Claire stopped. "Is Mark in there?" "This? Then let's go." When the door opened, Claire saw Robert lying on the bed, pale, hooked up to several machines. He looked smaller than she remembered. Frailer. Older. Mark sat in a chair in the corner, his head bowed. Robert turned his face and saw Claire. His eyes instantly filled with tears. "Claire." She approached the bed. She stood there, looking at the man who had once been her hero and who had later become her greatest tormentor. "I paid for the surgery," she said, her voice firm, but her eyes moist. "You'll be fine." Robert began to cry. Not a restrained cry, a desperate, broken cry. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry. I was a terrible father to you. I didn't believe in you when I should have. I treated you like you were worthless, and you are. You always were. I was wrong. Completely wrong." please forgive me." Claire felt tears streaming down her face too. 10 years of hurt, rejection, pain, all coming to the surface. Barbara approached, crying too. "Claire, I was horrible to you. I said terrible things. I abandoned you when you needed me. I treated you like a disgrace when I should have treated you with pride. You built something incredible on your own, and I didn't recognize it. I'm so sorry. I'm truly sorry." Mark finally got up from his chair. He was different. No more arrogance, no more superiority, just a broken, humiliated, lost man. He stood in front of Claire, unable to look her in the eye. "I was the worst of all," he said, his voice low. "I laughed at you. I called your dream ridiculous. I called you a failure. And now here you are, saving our father, offering me a job. I have no words, Claire. I have nothing to justify what I did. All I can say is that I'm sorry, and that you're a much better person than I'll ever be." Claire looked at the three of them, broken, regretful, desperate, and realized she no longer felt anger. She felt sadness. Sadness for the lost years, for the wounds that will never fully heal, for what could have been and never was. "I forgive you," she said finally. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. And holding on to anger will only destroy me. But things will be different now. You'll have to respect me. You'll have to acknowledge what I've built, and you'll have to prove that you've truly changed." The three waved, crying, and in that hospital room, something began to rebuild. Something broken, full of cracks, but perhaps, with time and effort, could become something new. The next 6 months were spent rebuilding. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Robert's surgery was successful. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital and then another 2 months at home recovering. Physical therapy was intense, 3 times a week. He had to relearn how to move his right arm, which was partially paralyzed. He had to relearn how to speak some words, which were slurred. It was a slow and frustrating process for him, but he fought through it. And for the first time in his life, he called Claire. It wasn't Barbara who called asking. It was himself, his voice still a little slurred from the after effects of the stroke. "Claire, can you come visit me today?" She went, and kept going. Every week, Claire stopped by her parents' house to check on Robert. At first, the conversations were tense, full of awkward pauses, with no one knowing exactly what to say. But gradually, they began to really talk. Robert shared his fears when Claire announced she was leaving business administration. "I grew up with nothing, Claire. My father worked his whole life in a factory and barely made ends meet. I was so afraid you'd go through the same hardships, so afraid you wouldn't be able to support yourself. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you toward something safe, but I was wrong. I wasn't protecting you. I was suffocating you." Claire listened. She didn't justify what he did, but she understood a little better where it was coming from. Barbara started showing up at the store. At first, Claire thought it was strange, but her mother asked, "Let me help. I want to be a part of this. I want to see what you've built." Claire agreed. Barbara started as a volunteer, organizing the racks, welcoming customers, keeping everything in order, and in their daily interactions, working side by side, they began to talk. Real conversations. One day, while sorting through new items that had arrived, Barbara stopped and looked at Claire. "I'm so ashamed of how I treated you. When I see these beautiful clothes, when I see the happy customers, when I see everything you've built, I realize how stupid I was. How much time I wasted that I could have spent supporting you, celebrating you. Why did you do that, Mom? Why were you so cold?" Barbara sighed. "Because I was jealous. I know it sounds absurd. But I spent my whole life doing what was expected of me. I got married young, became a housewife, never pursued anything I truly wanted. And when I saw you having the courage to go after what you wanted, it stirred something in me. I projected my frustrations onto you. And that was horrible of me." Claire looked at her mother with new eyes. For the first time, she saw Barbara not as the villain of the story, but as a woman who had also had her own dreams buried. Mark started working at the store the second week of November. He arrived on his first day looking downcast and embarrassed. Claire put him in charge of organizing inventory, making deliveries, and cleaning the space. He worked in silence for the first few weeks. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for favors. He just did what he was told. One day, while making a delivery together, he finally spoke. "I thought I was better than you, my whole life. Because I had an engineering degree, because I earned well, because I had what everyone says is success. And look where I am now, lost, with nothing. While you, who I called a failure, are building an empire. I learned that humility is not something we choose to learn. Sometimes life forces us." Claire looked at her brother. He had lost weight. There were new wrinkles around his eyes. He looked smaller. "You're learning, Mark. That's what matters now." Claire made it clear to everyone from the beginning. She forgave. But things would be different now. "I won't forget what happened. I won't pretend everything's okay. But I'm willing to rebuild a relationship on my terms, with respect, with recognition, with truth." And they accepted. Because they had no choice. Because they realized they had almost lost her forever. 8 months after Robert's surgery, Claire opened her second store. It was bigger than the first, in an even better neighborhood, with more employees and more infrastructure. The business was growing fast. She made a point of inviting her family to the opening, and this time, they all came. Robert arrived half an hour early, still walking slowly from the after effects, but he was there. He helped arrange chairs for the guests. Barbara arrived with flowers. Mark brought a handwritten sign. "Congratulations, Claire. You're amazing." As Claire delivered her opening remarks, thanking everyone who had supported her over the years, she looked at her family, and for the first time, she saw tears of genuine pride in their eyes. They weren't tears of pity. They weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of genuine recognition, of true admiration, of genuine pride. After the opening, as the guests were leaving, Robert held Claire's hand. "I'm so proud of you. I don't know if I've said this before, but I am. You're the strongest person I know." Barbara hugged her, crying, "You did it, daughter. You really did it. And I'm so sorry I wasn't here from the beginning." Mark stayed last. He looked around the store, at the clothes on the racks, at the happy customers, at everything Claire had built. "You're my role model now, little sister. Really." That night, driving home, Claire reflected on everything. On the 10 years of struggle, on the rejection, on the loneliness, on the victories she'd won alone, on the decision to help even when she could have turned her back. She realized that her greatest success wasn't the store. It wasn't the money. It wasn't proving herself right. Her greatest success was going through it all and not becoming bitter. It was maintaining her humanity. It was choosing forgiveness over revenge. It was remaining herself, even when the world tried to break her. And that, she knew, was something no one could take away from her. Ever. Claire's story teaches us something powerful about forgiveness, resilience, and who we choose to be when life tests us. She could have turned bitter. She could have let her family's rejection destroy her dreams. She could have given up when she was starving in that tiny room. She could have turned her back when her mother called for help. But she did none of those things. Claire chose to be greater than her pain. She chose to build instead of destroy. She chose to forgive instead of revenge. And that doesn't mean she was weak. Quite the opposite. It took immense strength to do what she did. To keep going when everything screamed for her to stop. To help those who hurt her. To forgive those who didn't deserve forgiveness. The moral of this story is clear. True success isn't measured by the money you make or the approval you receive. It's measured by the kind of person you choose to be when no one is looking. When it would be easier to be cruel. When it would be easier to give up. When it would be easier to become the very thing that hurt you. Claire proved that it's possible to follow your dreams even when no one believes in you. She proved that it's possible to forgive without forgetting. She proved that it's possible to set healthy boundaries and still maintain your humanity. She remained human, and that was her greatest victory. What about you? What kind of person are you choosing to be in your darkest moments? When someone rejects you, do you become bitter, or do you use it as fuel to grow? Tell me your thoughts on this story in the comments. And if this story touched your heart in any way, like the video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell to receive more moving and inspiring stories like this. Your participation here is very important to me.